Our next speaker is Una Cousins. Una is a visiting research fellow from the University of Oxford and an ambassador for the charity Long COVID Support. She was also a professional rower and pre-selected for the Tokyo Olympics until long COVID unfortunately forced her to end her career. As a former professional athlete, she will be talking about her experience of long COVID and exercise as a patient, advocate and researcher, and also participation research methods. And there won't be a Q&A for this section. So welcome to you, Una.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Una Cousins. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak at this event and for the team at Unite to Fight for all the work that's gone into this amazing conference. It's really an honour to be here. To give some background, I'm currently a visiting research fellow at Oxford University, undertaking a fellowship in social science research, studying long COVID. I'm also an ambassador for the UK-based charity Long COVID Support. Before contracting long COVID, I was a professional athlete on the British rowing team, and I had been pre-selected for the Tokyo Olympics. I have an undergraduate degree in biological natural sciences from the University of Cambridge and a master's in development studies from SOAS. Today, I want to talk about my experience with long COVID over the past 4 years and the 3 different roles I've played within that time. I will start with my experience as a patient, then as an advocate, and finally as a researcher. Throughout the presentation, I hope to demonstrate the importance of the patient perspective. Patient. In this section, I will give an overview of my experience with long COVID. March 2020 to September 2020, a foggy blur. In March 2020, amid growing concerns worldwide about the coronavirus, my teammates and I on the British rowing team were in our final week of testing for selection for the Olympics. Once the week was concluded, team selection was announced and I had been given a seat in the women's 8. This day was memorable for other reasons too. I remember vividly the conversation I had with my coach about a cold I had come down with during testing and how I now needed a few days off to recover. As we learnt what symptoms were associated with the virus, we realised my cold was actually likely to be COVID-19. My diagnosis would later be confirmed by an antibody test. My memories of the first few months of my illness are pretty hazy. At this time, my symptoms were varied and unpredictable, including periods of intense fight or flight, very bad insomnia, loss of appetite, brain fog, and sometimes post-exertional malaise. It was very difficult to figure out what was happening with my health, which was also compounded by significant brain fog. I did have a bunch of medical tests, but I always felt that their focus on my heart and lungs was misplaced, as my symptoms felt to me to be neurological, hormonal, and immune system based. In September 2020, after an attempt to string some sessions together, I ended up crashing very hard. It was now obvious that I was long-term sick, and my team doctor and I made the decision that I should not attempt to return for the postponed Tokyo Olympics. September 2020 to September 2021, rest and pacing. At this stage, my symptoms have become more predictable. My major issue was what is often called fatigue and PM, but I also had some mild dysautonomia, urinary issues and digestive issues, and temperature intolerance. It had become clear to me that I had a daily energy envelope, which in September 2020 was about 4 hours of basic tasks encompassing cooking, showering, speaking on the phone, and sometimes a short walk. Any activity beyond this would trigger PM and make all my symptoms much worse. The word fatigue is often used, but I really don't think it's an appropriate term for the symptoms I was experiencing. The quote-unquote fatigue I experienced was completely different from regular tiredness. It comprised weakness, dizziness, nausea, a sense of fight or flight, and brain fog. It also included a lack of energy, but this felt mostly as a result of how sick I was. For a year, I took an aggressive rest approach to recovery. I aimed to avoid any sort of PM, and I was pretty successful in doing that. I found with this approach, my health incredibly slowly but surely did improve. I was in a very fortunate position in many ways. Firstly, that I had a type of long COVID that did improve with rest, which is clearly not the case for many people. Secondly, British Rowing continued to support me financially and gave me access to private healthcare. And thirdly, I had no demands on my time except to look after myself. Alongside this, I think there are a couple of other things about my background that helped facilitate this aggressive rest approach. Firstly, being an athlete gave me an understanding of the energy cost of different activities. Our training programs push our bodies to the limit of their capacity, with the expectation that outside of training, the priority has to be rest and recovery. As a result, it was second nature to me that everything in life has an energy cost for the body. When we talk about rest and PM, it is sometimes suggested that exercise is the only thing that causes PM, but in fact it is any exertion, physical, cognitive, or even emotional, that will use up your energy envelope. With my background, I was already very familiar with this, and I had been managing all my daily activities like cooking, cognitive work, leaving the house for years. This mindset could quite easily be applied to long COVID, but now, instead of managing myself for optimal training, I was managing myself for healing and recovery. Secondly, I also have an understanding of physiology from my undergraduate degree. I could feel and understand that my immune system and sympathetic system were kicking off when I triggered PM, and I felt sure that this was bad for my health and should be avoided. September 2021 to September 2022, return to training. Through the back of summer 2021, I started to feel myself approaching normal. Then in September, after the second dose of the Pfizer vaccine, there was a step change. The fatigue and PM had gone and I felt able to return to training. However, I discovered that I still had mild dysautonomia, experienced only as occasional flare-ups of my sympathetic system. These would pass within 24 hours of rest. The doctors confirmed the diagnosis of dysautonomia and they said it would improve with exercise and fitness, and this advice added up to my experience. Training was triggering the flare-ups, but the threshold at which I was experiencing flare-ups was improving with my fitness, and so I continued to train. I had a really good year in many ways. I built my training up to 12 sessions per week by the summer of 2022, and my scores were getting closer to my previous fitness levels. It genuinely seemed like I was back and that I was just getting over the final remnants of the illness. September 2022 to December 2022, relapse. In September 2022, confident of a return to good health, I returned to the GB rowing team training programme. This meant my training volume increased again, but in a matter of weeks I hit a ceiling and I started to relapse. Instead of dysautonomia flare-ups coming and then going, I became stuck in a rolling flare-up and my body was constantly in sympathetic mode. The physiologist I was working with did not question the doctor's advice that dysautonomia would go away with exercise. I saw other doctors, but none of them looked at me holistically, and the medications they were prescribing me were just sticking plasters and did not address the root cause, which was the stress that training was putting on my body. As I got more sick, the relapse became traumatic and I dissociated from my body. I finally stopped training in November 2022, and once I stopped, any adrenaline that had been keeping me going drained out of me. The crash really hit and I became very unwell again. As a result of this relapse, I made the decision to retire from professional sport. 2023, recovery from relapse. In this relapse, I experienced a whole host of new symptoms. I developed histamine issues, blood glucose regulation issues, and bad digestive issues. Interestingly, the distinctive fatigue and PM of the first bout of long COVID did not return. However, I was exhausted and debilitated by these new symptoms. I was referred to an endocrinologist who treated my gut dysbiosis with antibiotics, antifungals, prescribed antihistamines and prescribed progesterone for the second half of my menstrual cycle. He also suggested a variety of supplements. With these treatments, again with aggressive and prolonged rest, my symptoms gradually reduced through the year. 2024, Oxford. I was able to start my role at Oxford in January 2024. I still have some urinary symptoms, brain fog, and sometimes fatigue, depending on how much I do. I can still only do very minimal exercise. Recently, a urogynecologist has prescribed me with a mast cell stabilizer, and this has improved my energy levels further. I'm grateful to be living a more normal life now, but I am still constantly aware of my health, and it continues to dictate what I can and can't do. I'm not sure what the future holds. I am cautiously hopeful that with time and continued rest, I can continue to make improvements, but I also feel it is very likely my body will never completely return to what it used to be. This to date is my experience of long COVID as a patient. At this point, I would like to highlight three main takeaways. Firstly, I'm able to break down the various phases of my illness now, but this is only with the benefit of hindsight. I feel like this can misrepresent the lived reality of this illness, which does not involve this level of clarity at all. Instead, it involves coping with constant uncertainty about the future, continuously adjusting expectations and potential timelines. Secondly, I've had the privilege to see many excellent doctors who believed me and did not gaslight me, which is very much not the case for far too many long COVID patients. But even though I had access to this type of healthcare, no doctor grasped how long it would take to get better or how much rest it would require. The way I have managed rest and recovery has been based entirely on my own understanding of my body and trusting my own intuition. Thirdly, as someone who has been invited to speak in order to share the patient perspective, I also feel a responsibility to talk about the immense difficulty of this experience. I believe many will resonate with the fact that this illness inflicts a level of distress that's often incomprehensible to those who have not experienced it. Beyond the symptoms themselves and the lack of treatments, there's the profound impact on daily life, an overwhelming grief for a life not lived, the burden of a huge amount of social stigma, all combined with so much uncertainty. It's deeply traumatic on many levels, and I cannot emphasize enough how important it is that we improve the treatment and support available. Advocate. Now I would like to move on to talk about advocacy. Within the world of long COVID, there is a very strong community of remarkable patient advocates. and I continue to be inspired by the work that has been done and is being done, not least by the team that has put this conference together. There are many things I would like to talk about, but I think one of the most valuable contributions I can make in my capacity as a former professional athlete is to help dispel the widespread and extremely damaging belief that exercise has a role to play in curing long COVID, ME, and other post-acute infection syndromes. This section will be structured as follows: the psychosomatic and CBT GET paradigm, PEM, graded activity without PEM, dysautonomia. The psychosomatic and CBT GET paradigm. British investigative journalist George Monbiot has called the treatment of ME patients the greatest medical scandal of the 21st century. For decades, the dominant hypothesis for ME has been that it stems from abnormal illness beliefs and behaviours alongside reduced activity and physical deconditioning. In line with this, treatment recommendations have been graded exercise therapy and cognitive behavioural therapy, GET and CBT. This paradigm has caused and continues to cause absolutely horrifying levels of long-term harm to patients. The GET-CBT approach has been discredited in scientific literature for some time, but clinicians who advocate for it still persist in their stance. Their influence extends to healthcare systems, governments, and health insurers to the detriment of patients who continue to suffer. The damage is not just limited to the harmful healthcare patients receive, but also the belief that the disease is psychosomatic has hindered desperately needed research into the pathophysiology of the condition, leaving millions with this illness without treatment or a cure. The perception of and response to long COVID is derived from this foundation. As the pandemic struck, many people in the ME world predicted that the spread of the SARS-CoV-2 virus would result in a wave of patients with prolonged non-specific symptoms who would be labelled with psychiatric issues, and this prediction has indeed played out with long COVID. As a result of the total lack of funding and research for ME, there is not a large community of researchers who are well versed in this condition, and most academics and clinicians were completely unaware of the inevitability of long-term consequences of a viral infection. This should serve as a wake-up call for the medical and academic community to listen to patients. When I came across the GET-CBT paradigm, I honestly could not believe it. The idea was so evidently contradictory to my lived experience and the understanding of illness in high-performance sport. In high-performance sport, it is understood that training and making a physical effort whilst ill is almost always a very effective way to make yourself more ill. In order to minimize time after training, the best practice is to recognize early warning signs of illness, rest, and then resume training only when fully healthy. And rest does not mean simply not exercising. It means spending most of the day lying horizontally, either in bed or on the sofa. An exception may be made during competition or when you're undergoing testing for selection. In these cases, it may be necessary to push through illness, but it is understood that there will be a price for it later on. I made that decision to push through in March 2020, and I absolutely attribute part of the reason I developed such severe long COVID is due to the fact that I was racing during my initial infection. It is recognised there are a few illnesses that benefit from exercise, but these are seen as the absolute exception to the rule. In my experience, dysautonomia may be a case that does not fit neatly into either box, and I will speak more about this later. I applied this understanding of illness that I had gained from high performance sport to my long COVID, and it is without a doubt the main thing that helped me make my recovery. Therefore, my experience is the complete opposite to the GET-CBT approach. I will now explain more why I believe the GET approach is so flawed. PEM. The most important reason GET is harmful is because of what is known as post-exertional malaise, or PEM, something many people with long COVID or ME experience. PEM is an exacerbation of symptoms that is triggered after exertion. It usually starts 24 to 72 hours after the exertion and can last for hours, days, weeks, or even months. It can be triggered by anything that uses up your energy envelope, physical, cognitive, or emotional exertion. The level of activity that is considered exertion differs from patient to patient, depending on how severely ill they are, and can be anything from light sensitivity all the way up to exercising. Triggering PEM or pushing through PEM is a very effective way to make your symptoms far worse, hinder your recovery, and worst of all, lower your baseline functional capacity and therefore making your illness worse long term. GET is a very effective way of triggering PEM, and therefore it's a very effective way of making people more sick. Can graded exercise therapy be appropriate if you don't have PEM, or you can complete it without triggering PEM? PEM is a very important part of why these programs are harmful, but it's not the only reason they are flawed. I've encountered graded exercise or graded daily activity programs that come with the recommendation to complete them whilst avoiding PEM with the promise of curing fatigue. However, I find this approach to also be deeply flawed. In my view, it involves some fundamental misunderstandings. Firstly, I think people hear the word fatigue and think of tiredness, However, in reality, the fatigue in the context of these illnesses can take many different forms and is entirely distinct from healthy sensations. I have spent years paying attention to how my body feels, and the fatigue associated with long COVID is nothing like tiredness or the sensations you get when you are deconditioned. As I've previously mentioned, during the initial phase of long COVID, my experience of fatigue and PEM was characterized by a very sick feeling encompassing nausea, fight and flight, dizziness, brain fog. After I relapsed at the end of 2022, I experienced another form of fatigue that was distinct from the initial bout and attributable to a myriad of new symptoms. We lack precise terminology to articulate these varied experiences, but their differences are unmistakable, and the underlying physiology behind these sensations is evidently distinct from that of healthy tiredness. Secondly, I can point out that I was incredibly fit and had pretty much all the benefits exercise can provide when I got sick initially. Rowers train roughly 25 hours a week for 49 weeks of a year. None of this stopped me being absolutely debilitated by long COVID fatigue. This is because I was sick, not deconditioned. Dysautonomia. Dysautonomia is a complicating factor, and I have found it as one that does not fit neatly into the rest is good or exercise is good box. In the year I returned to training, I did find fitness improve the threshold of activity in which I started to experience symptoms. However, when I overloaded my system and got stuck in a dysautonomia flare, this was terrible for my body. And if I could go back, I would not have exercised myself into this state. I also think that pushing my body into dysautonomia flares with exercise throughout that year that I returned to training, even if they did pass with rest, was a bad idea too. I feel that the stress those flares put on my body contributed to the extent of the relapse I experienced. It is also possible that I had other conditions at that time that I was not aware of, which are also part of this picture. Whatever the cause is, if I could go back in time, I would definitely not attempt to return to training. I was very well in September 2021, and I'm now still paying a price for training whilst I was still ill. We have a cultural fixation on the notion that soldiering on and pushing through is a sign of strength, which in my view is totally misguided. I think this fixation is partly a result of progress in modern medicine and the fact that there is often a pill you can pop to treat your disease. But with this progress, we have lost the understanding that rest is a vital part of enabling your body to recover from illness. Obviously, people with an illness often have no choice but to push on in order to go to work or look after their family. But when it is possible, in my view, resting and stepping away from life takes so much more strength than pushing through, and it is a horrific stigma that people who have to rest are seen as lazy. Saying no involves sacrificing living, and there is an overwhelming grief associated with that. No one gives you a medal for sitting at home, but I'm able to say it is truly incomparably harder than any Olympic training I've ever done. In summary, I reject entirely that the GET-CBT paradigm or the idea of rehab as it is classically understood is appropriate for patients with long COVID, ME, or other similar illnesses, even if you can do it without PEM. Classically understood rehab involves doing more in order to rebuild capacity, but my approach was the complete opposite. Aggressive rest and pacing of all types of activity for very long periods of time have rebuilt my capacity and have been without a doubt the main thing that has helped my recovery. Research. In January 2024, I began a social science engagement fellowship at the University of Oxford with Professor Beth Greenhill and Dr. Marek Jokela-Bassini, exploring how social science methods can be used to support and engage people with long COVID. I joined the research project as a patient representative and as a member of the charity Long COVID Support. The fellowship includes two projects, a research agenda setting exercise and the development of a body mapping toolkit. Today, I will focus on the methodology of our study, which adheres to the principles of participatory research, in which I'm employed as a member of the research team. This is a methodology in which those traditionally seen as the participants, in this case long COVID patients, are engaged as equal partners at all stages of the research process. It is collaborative, egalitarian approach, which challenges the hierarchical academic processes that usually take place in universities. It acknowledges the expertise and perspectives of patients as valuable assets in generating knowledge. These methodologies have also emerged with a particular focus on their role in tackling disparities across social, political, economic, and environmental inequality and injustice. It aims to not only provide better research insights, but also endeavours to foster positive social change. The key components of this methodology are written on the slide. They are 1, participation of non-scientific actors as co-researchers in the research process. 2, empowerment of these partners through learning processes, competence development, and individual and collective empowerment. 3, the dual objective of researching and changing social reality, and thus the action and application orientation of the research. There are a number of advantages to this approach, which I will explain further now. 1, improving outputs. Patient and public involvement in research is widely understood to have a range of benefits for improving output. This is because it helps research to be 1, more relevant to participants, 2, designed in a way which is acceptable to participants, 3, have participant information which is understandable to participants, 4, provide a better experience of research, 5, have better communication and results to participants at the end of the study. Hopefully, the previous 2 sections of this presentation have shown the value of the patient perspective. Unless you've experienced these illnesses yourself, I think it is impossible to fully understand them. By bringing patients into the team, it is possible to broaden the scope of issues considered. And because I'm a full-time member of the team, I'm able to be part of every conversation and decision that is made, so the patient perspective is embedded throughout. I also think my presence in our workshops helps provide a more psychologically safe environment in which participants are supported to share and communicate their experiences. Involving patients throughout the process thus facilitates research that more accurately represents the social realities of participants and is more impactful, relevant, and ethical. Emancipatory effects. Secondly, and why I think this method is particularly interesting, is that it empowers patients through learning processes, and in doing so, it can be emancipatory, reshaping social dynamics and enabling research to have positive social impacts that go beyond just its final output. Because Beth and Marette made the decision to hire me as part of the research team, I'm able to gain insights into research and academia more generally. As I'm guided through the project, I'm learning about funding processes, social science methodology, and the dissemination of findings. In the department, I'm attending seminars, being part of conversations, and generally being immersed in the culture and language of academia. This hands-on experience builds an understanding that is difficult to obtain by other means. The project is also improving trust and mutual understanding between the charity Long COVID Support and the university. By building stronger relationships between these organisations, both parties can leverage each other's expertise and resources more effectively for future collaborations. With a better grasp of research processes and better relationships between patient groups and universities, patients can advocate for themselves more effectively. The more patients are involved in participatory research projects, the more this knowledge sharing effect would be magnified, potentially making our collective advocacy more impactful. The cumulative result is that participatory research serves to empower patients to influence positive change. This stands in contrast to much of the long COVID patient experience in which we often find ourselves at the wrong end of a power dynamic when it comes to influencing decisions about our own healthcare or when advocating for wider changes. Of course, there are limits to participatory research that must be carefully considered. These include potential power differences, budgeting, ownership of research data and authorship rights. Careful attention must also be taken to minimise potential harm. It's important to consider patients' capacity to do work without making symptoms worse, and the fact that collaboration will involve sharing and reflecting on personal and traumatic experiences. In conclusion, although it does need careful thought, participatory research offers the potential for valuable research insights and, importantly, for advancing social justice. I would love to see more research projects being run in this way because I really believe it can help provide a pathway to better outcomes for all those living with long COVID. So, I've come to the end of my presentation. I've spoken about a variety of things, but if you can remember 3 things from this talk, I would love it to be: 1, aggressive rest and pacing has been the key factor in my recovery. 2, the GET-CBT paradigm is useless and extremely harmful. I reject entirely that the idea of rehab, as it is classically understood, is appropriate for patients with long COVID, ME, or any other similar illnesses, even if you can do it without PEM. 3, participatory research methods provide the potential for valuable research insights and, importantly, for advancing social justice. COVID must be the last pandemic in which we are totally unprepared for the long-term impacts of viral illness. Long COVID provides an opportunity to push for a paradigm shift in our understanding of post-acute infection syndromes, and it must not be lost. Patients are leading the charge for change. Let's remain united in our advocacy for improved recognition, treatment, and support for all types of post-acute infectious syndromes. Thank you very much for listening.